The morning air at Chicago's Union Station was crisp with the promise of autumn, and I could feel my heart beating faster as I watched my daughter Lily adjust the worn leather strap of her grandfather's old suitcase. At 18, she was about to embark on her first solo journey to New York City for her college interview at Columbia University. The suitcase, a weathered brown leather case with brass corners that had seen better days, had belonged to my late father, and despite its shabby appearance, it held more sentimental value than any designer luggage ever could. "Mom, stop worrying," Lily said, noticing my nervous fidgeting as we stood in the bustling terminal. Her voice carried that mix of excitement and independence that I'd been hearing more often lately. "It's just a train ride, and the interview isn't until tomorrow afternoon. I'll have plenty of time to prepare." The station was alive with the usual morning rush, business travelers with their sleek rolling luggage, families herding excited children toward platforms, and college students like Lily, though most of them carried modern backpacks and bright-colored suitcases. I noticed how some people's eyes lingered on Lily's vintage suitcase, and I felt a familiar pang of insecurity about our financial situation. As a single mother working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and evening hours as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, I had managed to save enough for Lily's train ticket and a modest hotel room for one night, but there hadn't been money for new luggage. Lily had insisted she didn't mind using her grandfather's suitcase, claiming it gave her good luck and made her feel connected to him. Still, I worried about how she might be perceived. Platform 7, for the Lakeshore Limited to New York Penn Station, now boarding. The announcement echoed through the vaulted ceiling of the historic station. My stomach tightened. This was it. I hugged Lily tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, the same drugstore brand we'd been using for years. "Call me when you get to the hotel, okay? And remember what we practiced for the interview questions." "I will, Mom. I love you." She picked up the old suitcase, and I noticed how she held it with pride rather than embarrassment. That was my Lily, never ashamed of who she was or where she came from. As we walked toward Platform 7, I spotted a group of well-dressed teenagers near the boarding area. They appeared to be around Lily's age, with expensive-looking luggage sets and designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They were clearly from a different world than ours, the kind of world that Lily was hoping to enter through education and hard work. "This is where I leave you," I said, stopping at the platform entrance where only ticketed passengers were allowed. "You've got this, sweetheart. Grandpa would be so proud." Lily smiled, but I could see the nervousness behind her confident facade. She joined the line of passengers waiting to board, her worn suitcase looking even more conspicuous among the sea of matching luggage sets and high-tech travel gear. That's when I heard the first snicker. "Oh my God, look at that ancient suitcase," one of the well-dressed girls whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She was a tall blonde wearing what looked like a designer coat and carrying a pristine white suitcase set that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her companion, a brunette with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails, giggled. "It looks like it belongs in a museum. Who still uses leather suitcases like that? I mean, doesn't it have wheels at least?" I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Lily was ahead of me in line, and I could see her shoulders tense slightly. She had heard them too. "Maybe she's going to some kind of vintage costume party," another voice chimed in, this time from a boy wearing an expensive-looking college prep school jacket. "Or maybe she raided her great-grandmother's attic." The comments continued, each one feeling like a small knife in my heart. I wanted to march over there and defend my daughter, to tell them that her grandfather had carried that suitcase through 3 decades of business trips, that it had traveled to 12 countries, and had more character than their pristine luggage would ever possess. But Lily had always asked me to let her handle her own battles, and interrupting now might embarrass her more. I watched as Lily straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly, a gesture I recognized as her way of gathering courage. She turned around and looked directly at the group of teenagers who had been making the comments. "Excuse me," she said politely but firmly, her voice carrying clearly in the busy terminal. "I couldn't help but notice you commenting on my suitcase." The blonde girl looked surprised that Lily was addressing them directly. She exchanged glances with her friends, clearly not expecting a response. "This suitcase belonged to my grandfather," Lily continued, her voice steady and proud. "He was a traveling salesman for 30 years, and this case went with him everywhere from small towns in Kansas to big cities like New York. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left it to me along with a note saying that good luggage, like good people, gets better with age and experience. The terminal seemed to grow quieter around them, and I noticed other passengers had stopped their conversations to listen. He also wrote that the value of something isn't measured by its price tag or how new it looks, but by the memories it carries and the purpose it serves. Today, this suitcase is carrying my dreams to Columbia University for my interview, just like it carried his dreams to build a better life for our family. The group of teenagers looked uncomfortable now, their earlier smugness replaced by obvious embarrassment. The blonde girl opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. "I hope you all have wonderful trips," Lily said with a genuine smile before turning back toward the train. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. My daughter had handled that situation with more grace and dignity than I could have ever managed. The pride swelling in my chest was almost overwhelming. Just then, a uniformed train conductor approached the line. He was an older African-American man with kind eyes and silver hair peeking out from under his cap. He had been standing nearby during the entire exchange, and I could see from his expression that he had heard everything. "Miss," he said, addressing Lily directly, "may I see your ticket, please?" Lily handed him her coach ticket, looking slightly confused. The conductor examined it carefully, then looked up at her with a warm smile. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," he said loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "This ticket shows coach seating, but I believe you're supposed to be in first class." Lily looked bewildered. "I'm sorry, sir, but I think there might be some confusion. I definitely bought a coach ticket." The conductor winked at her conspiratorially. "No confusion at all, miss. Sometimes the best passengers deserve the best accommodations. Consider it an upgrade courtesy of the railroad's appreciation for young people who understand that true class has nothing to do with the price of your luggage." The group of teenagers who had been mocking Lily earlier looked stunned. Other passengers in line began smiling and nodding approvingly. I heard someone behind me whisper, "That girl handled that beautifully." "But I can't afford the difference," Lily protested quietly. "No additional charge," the conductor assured her. "Just a gesture of goodwill from those of us who recognize character when we see it." As Lily walked toward the train, now holding a first-class ticket, she turned back to look at me one more time. The smile on her face was radiant, but it wasn't because of the upgrade, it was because she had stood up for herself and her family's dignity, and that felt better than any luxury accommodation ever could. The conductor approached me as the last passengers boarded. "You've raised a remarkable young woman," he said quietly. "In 35 years of working on these rails, I've seen all kinds of people. The ones with the most expensive luggage aren't always the ones with the most class." As the train pulled away from the station, I watched it disappear into the distance, carrying my daughter toward her future. The old suitcase that had started the day as a source of my worry had become a symbol of our family's strength and values. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with the simplest baggage. The first-class car was a world apart from anything I had ever experienced. The seats were wide and comfortable, upholstered in deep blue fabric with plenty of legroom. Small tables accompanied each seat, and the windows were larger than in coach, offering expansive views of the American countryside. I carefully placed Grandpa's suitcase in the overhead compartment, noticing how the other first-class passengers' luggage seemed to make room for it respectfully. As the train began its journey eastward, I settled into my seat and tried to process what had just happened. The conductor, whose nameplate read Mr. Thompson, had not only upgraded my ticket, but had done so in a way that affirmed everything my mother and grandfather had taught me about dignity and self-respect. "First time in first class?" asked the woman sitting across the aisle from me. She appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair styled elegantly and wearing a simple but well-tailored navy suit. Her smile was genuine and warm. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, still feeling slightly out of place despite Mr. Thompson's kindness. "It's actually my first time traveling alone anywhere. How exciting! I'm Mrs. Patterson, by the way. Where are you headed?" "New York City. I have a college interview at Columbia University tomorrow." The words felt surreal as I spoke them. Just this morning, I had been worried about making a good impression with an old suitcase, and now I was sitting in first class having a conversation with someone who clearly belonged in this elevated environment. Mrs. Patterson's face lit up. Columbia. How wonderful. What are you hoping to study? Journalism, I said, my confidence growing. I want to write stories that matter, about people whose voices aren't usually heard. That's a noble calling, she said thoughtfully. You know, I couldn't help but overhear what happened back at the station. The way you handle that situation, standing up for yourself and your family's values, that takes real courage. Those are exactly the qualities great journalists need. The train was now moving through the suburbs of Chicago, and I watched as neat rows of houses gave way to open farmland. The rhythm of the rails was soothing, and I found myself relaxing for the first time all day. Can I tell you something? Mrs. Patterson continued. I've been traveling this route for over 20 years, and I've never seen Mr. Thompson do anything like that before. He's always been kind and professional, but what he did for you today was special. I think he saw something in you that impressed him. I thought about the conductor's words and his knowing smile. He said something about recognizing character when he sees it. Exactly. You know, there's something refreshing about meeting a young person who understands that true worth isn't measured by material possessions. In my line of work, I meet a lot of people who have confused having expensive things with being valuable as human beings. What do you do? I asked, curious about this elegant woman who seemed so interested in my story. I'm retired now, but I spent 30 years as a college admissions counselor. I helped review applications and conduct interviews at several universities, including Columbia. My heart skipped a beat. Really? Mrs. Patterson nodded. I've seen thousands of interviews over the years, and I can tell you that the most memorable candidates weren't necessarily the ones with the most impressive resumes or the most expensive clothes. They were the ones who demonstrated genuine character, resilience, and authentic passion for their chosen field. As the train rolled through Indiana, Mrs. Patterson shared stories from her career, describing students who had overcome significant obstacles to pursue their education. Some had been first-generation college students like myself, others had faced financial hardships, and some had dealt with discrimination or family challenges. What they all had in common, she explained, was a determination to succeed based on their own merit rather than their circumstances. Tell me about your grandfather, she said as we watched golden cornfields stretch toward the horizon. The suitcase obviously means a great deal to you. I found myself sharing memories I hadn't talked about in months. Grandpa had been my biggest supporter, always encouraging my writing and telling me that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from me. He had grown up during the Great Depression and understood the value of hard work and persistence. He used to say that character is like a muscle. It only gets stronger when it's tested. I said, surprised by how easily the words flowed. I think today was one of those tests. And you passed with flying colors, Mrs. Patterson said warmly. Your grandfather would be very proud. Around lunchtime, Mr. Thompson appeared with the first-class meal service. The food was simple but elegante, a turkey sandwich with fresh vegetables, fruit, and cookies that reminded me of the ones my mother made on special occasions. How are you enjoying your journey, miss? He asked as he served my meal. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for the upgrade. But I have to ask, why did you do it? Mr. Thompson glanced around to make sure other passengers weren't listening, then leaned in slightly. Can I tell you a story? I nodded eagerly. 40 years ago, I was a young man about your age, traveling to Chicago for my first job interview with the railroad. I was wearing my father's old suit, the only dress clothes I owned, and carrying a cardboard suitcase that was literally held together with string. Some passengers in the waiting area made comments about my appearance, laughing about how I looked like I was heading to a costume party. Mrs. Patterson was listening now, too, clearly intrigued by this revelation. I was ready to turn around and go home, Mr. Thompson continued. But then an older conductor, a man named James Washington, approached me. He had heard the comments, and he told me something I've never forgotten. Son, the measure of a man isn't in what he carries, but in how he carries himself. Then he helped me get on that train, and told me that if I got the job, I should remember to help the next person who needed it. And you got the job, I said, understanding now. I got the job, and I've been with this railroad ever since. Over the years, I've tried to follow Mr. Washington's example, but I've never seen a situation quite like today, where someone stood up for themselves and their values with such grace and dignity. You reminded me of why I chose this profession in the first place, to help people on their journeys, both literal and metaphorical. The afternoon passed quickly as we traveled through Ohio. Mrs. Patterson and I continued our conversation, and she began offering advice about my upcoming interview. She explained what admissions committees were looking for and helped me practice answering common questions. "Remember," she said as we approached Pennsylvania, "they're not just evaluating your academic achievements. They want to see who you are as a person, what motivates you, and how you handle challenges. Today you've already demonstrated all of those qualities." As the evening approached and the train neared New York, I felt a transformation taking place within myself. The journey had begun with embarrassment about my grandfather's old suitcase, but it was ending with a deeper understanding of my own worth and potential. The group of teenagers who had mocked me earlier were in the coach section, and I hadn't seen them since boarding. But I realized that their comments, rather than diminishing me, had actually provided an opportunity to demonstrate the values my family had instilled in me. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said as the lights of New York City began to appear in the distance, "I have a feeling your interview tomorrow is going to go very well. You have something that can't be taught or bought: authentic character. That's what will set you apart." As the train pulled into Penn Station, I carefully retrieved Grandpa's suitcase from the overhead compartment. It looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but somehow it felt different now, not like a burden or source of embarrassment, but like a badge of honor. Mr. Thompson was at the door helping passengers disembark. When I reached him, he shook my hand warmly. "Good luck with your interview, Mississippi. I have a feeling we'll be reading your articles in major newspapers someday." Mrs. Patterson gave me her business card and a warm hug. "Please let me know how the interview goes. I meant what I said. You have all the qualities of someone destined for success." As I walked through the bustling corridors of Penn Station, pulling my grandfather's suitcase behind me, I felt ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The journey that had begun with mockery had become a lesson in self-respect, kindness, and the recognition that true class has nothing to do with the price of your luggage. The Columbia University campus was even more impressive than the photographs I had studied online. Gothic Revival buildings stretched along Broadway, their limestone facades catching the morning sunlight. Students hurried between classes carrying backpacks and coffee cups, and I could feel the intellectual energy that permeated every corner of this prestigious institution. I had spent the previous evening in a modest hotel near Times Square, practicing my interview responses and researching the journalism program. Mrs. Patterson's advice had been invaluable, and I felt more confident than I had expected. Still, as I approached the admissions building, my heart was racing. The suitcase rolled smoothly along the sidewalk beside me, and I no longer felt self-conscious about its worn appearance. If anything, I felt empowered by the story it represented and the values it embodied. "Excuse me, are you here for interviews too?" asked a voice behind me. I turned to see a young man about my age with kind eyes and a nervous smile. He was carrying a modern laptop bag and wearing khakis with a button-down shirt, the kind of outfit that screamed, "Prepared college applicant." "Yes, I am. I'm Lily," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Ryan. This place is incredible, isn't it? I'm from a small town in Oregon, so this is all pretty overwhelming." We walked together toward the admissions building, and I found his presence comforting. Ryan explained that he was interested in studying political science, with hopes of eventually working in public policy. "What about you?" he asked. "Journalism. I want to tell stories about people whose voices aren't usually heard." "That's awesome. We probably need more journalists like that." The admissions waiting room was filled with other prospective students, all looking polished and prepared. Some were reviewing notes, others were chatting nervously with their parents, and a few appeared surprisingly calm. I noticed that I was one of the only students there without a parent or guardian. "Lily Johnson," called a woman from behind the reception desk. My stomach flipped. "That's me. Professor Williams will see you now. Follow me, please." I left my suitcase with Ryan, who promised to keep an eye on it, and followed the receptionist down a hallway lined with photographs of distinguished alumni. The walls seemed to whisper stories of successful careers and important contributions to society. Professor Williams' office was exactly what I had imagined a college professor's office should look like: floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large wooden desk covered with papers, and windows that looked out onto the campus quad. Professor Williams herself was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. "Please have a seat," she said warmly, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I've reviewed your application materials, and I must say, your writing samples are quite impressive. Your essay about growing up in a single-parent household while maintaining academic excellence was particularly compelling. Thank you, Professor Williams. Writing has always been my way of making sense of the world. Tell me about that. What draws you to journalism specifically?" I had practiced this answer dozens of times, but in the moment, I found myself speaking from the heart rather than reciting memorized responses. I believe that everyone has a story worth telling, but not everyone has the platform or opportunity to tell it. I want to be the person who helps amplify those voices, the single mother working 3 jobs to support her family, the elderly man whose immigrant experience shaped a generation, the teenager who overcame addiction to graduate high school. These stories matter, and they deserve to be told with dignity and respect. Professor Williams nodded thoughtfully. That's an admirable goal. What experiences have shaped this perspective for you? I thought about the previous day's journey, about Mrs. Patterson's kindness, Mr. Thompson's wisdom, and even the cruel comments from the teenagers at the train station. Growing up, my family didn't have much money, but we had strong values. My mother worked multiple jobs to support us, and my grandfather taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their material possessions, but by their character and actions. I've experienced both kindness and judgment based on people's assumptions about my background, and those experiences have made me more determined to tell stories that look beyond surface appearances. Can you give me a specific example of a time when you demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity? Without hesitation, I found myself telling Professor Williams about the previous day's experience at the train station. I described the mockery, my response, and the unexpected kindness that followed. As I spoke, I watched her expression carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. "That's a remarkable story," she said when I finished. "How do you think that experience will influence your approach to journalism?" It reinforced my belief that dignity and respect should be at the center of every story. Those teenagers made assumptions about me based on my grandfather's old suitcase, but they didn't know the history it represented or the values it symbolized. As a journalist, I want to avoid making similar assumptions about the people I interview. I want to dig deeper and find the human story beneath the surface. Professor Williams asked several more questions about my academic goals, writing experience, and understanding of the journalism industry. I found myself growing more comfortable as the conversation progressed, and I began to feel like I was simply talking with someone who shared my passion for storytelling. "One final question," she said, glancing at her notes. "Columbia's journalism program is highly competitive and demanding. What makes you think you have what it takes to succeed here?" I paused, thinking about my mother's sacrifices, my grandfather's wisdom, and the journey that had brought me to this moment. "I think I have something that can't be taught in a classroom, authentic life experience, and a genuine desire to use journalism as a force for good. I may not have had all the advantages that some students have had, but I've learned resilience, empathy, and the importance of hard work. I believe those qualities, combined with Columbia's excellent training, would help me become the kind of journalist our society needs." Professor Williams smiled the first truly warm smile I had seen from her during the entire interview. "Thank you, Lily. You'll hear from us within 2 weeks about our decision." As I walked back to the waiting room, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The interview had gone better than I had expected, but I knew that Columbia received thousands of applications from qualified students. Ryan was still waiting with my suitcase, and his interview was scheduled next. "How did it go?" he asked eagerly. "I think it went well, but you never know. Good luck with yours." As I left the admissions building and walked across campus, I realized that regardless of Columbia's decision, the past 2 days had already changed me. I had learned to stand up for myself with dignity, I had experienced unexpected kindness from strangers, and I had articulated my dreams and values more clearly than ever before. The suitcase rolled beside me as I made my way back toward Penn Station for the return journey home. Tomorrow I would be back to my regular life, helping my mother with household responsibilities, working my part-time job at the local library, and finishing my senior year of high school. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. I thought about calling my mother to tell her about the interview, but I decided to wait until I was on the train. She would want to hear every detail, and I wanted to share not just the facts of what had happened, but the sense of possibility that was now filling my heart. As I walked through the streets of New York City, I noticed the incredible diversity of people around me: business people in expensive suits, street vendors selling hot dogs, students with backpacks, tourists taking photographs, homeless individuals asking for spare change. Each person had a story, a background, dreams and struggles that made them uniquely human. This is what I want to write about, I thought. These are the stories that matter. The old suitcase that had embarrassed me just 2 days ago now felt like a symbol of authenticity in a world that often valued appearance over substance. As I prepared for the journey home, I knew that whatever Columbia's decision, I was already on the right path. The train ride back to Chicago gave me plenty of time to reflect on everything that had happened over the past 2 days. As the familiar landscape of Pennsylvania and Ohio rolled by my window, I felt like a different person than the nervous girl who had left home just yesterday morning. Mr. Thompson was working the return trip as well, and when he saw me boarding with my grandfather's suitcase, his face lit up with a warm smile. "How did the interview go, miss?" "I think it went really well, thanks to all the confidence you and Mrs. Patterson helped me find yesterday." "I'm glad to hear it. You're in coach today, I assume." I nodded, showing him my ticket. "Back to reality," I said with a laugh. "Nothing wrong with coach," he said. "Some of my favorite passengers ride in coach. But you carry yourself like first-class material no matter where you sit." I found my assigned seat and settled in for the journey home. The coach section was comfortable, filled with a mix of business travelers, students, and families. I no longer felt the need to compare myself to other passengers or worry about what they might think of my luggage. About an hour into the journey, I noticed a commotion several rows ahead of me. A young mother was trying to calm her crying toddler while simultaneously managing several bags and what appeared to be a diaper bag that had spilled its contents into the aisle. Without thinking, I got up and walked over to her. "Can I help you with anything?" The woman looked up gratefully. She appeared to be about my mother's age, with tired eyes and the stressed expression of someone traveling alone with a small child. "That's so kind of you. I'm trying to get to the bathroom to change his diaper, but I can't manage all these bags and carry him too." "Here, let me hold your bags," I offered. "Take your time." As I waited for her to return, I struck up conversations with the passengers around me. There was an elderly man traveling to visit his grandchildren, a college student heading home for the weekend, and a middle-aged woman who was returning from a job interview in New York, much like myself. When the young mother returned with her now happy toddler, she thanked me profusely. "You're an angel. Traveling alone with a 2-year-old is no joke. I'm sure it's challenging. Where are you headed?" "Chicago. My husband is stationed there with the Army, and we're finally moving to be with him after 6 months apart." As we talked, I learned that her name was Jennifer and that she had been managing alone while her husband completed his military training. Her story reminded me of the kind of human interest pieces I hope to write someday, stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with grace and determination. The hours passed quickly as I found myself engaged in conversations with fellow passengers, sharing stories and learning about their lives. I realized that this was exactly what I loved about people. Everyone had a unique story, and most were willing to share it if someone just took the time to listen. As we approached Chicago, my phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. "Can't wait to hear about everything. I'll be at the station waiting for you." The thought of seeing my mother filled me with warmth. I had so much to tell her about the interview, about the kind people I had met, and about the confidence I had discovered within myself. When the train pulled into Union Station, I gathered my belongings and carefully retrieved my grandfather's suitcase from the overhead compartment. As I made my way through the car, several passengers I had talked with wished me luck with my college decision. Mr. Thompson was at the exit, helping passengers disembark. When he saw me, he stopped what he was doing. "Miss Lily, before you go, I want to give you something." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn business card. "This belonged to James Washington, the conductor I told you about yesterday. He gave it to me 40 years ago, and I've carried it ever since." I looked at the card. It was simple and old-fashioned, with Mr. Washington's name and a quote printed below. "Character is the foundation of all worthwhile success." "I can't take this," I protested. "It's too important to you." "That's exactly why you should have it," Mr. Thompson said. "Mr. Washington told me to pass it on when I met someone who truly understood its meaning. Yesterday you showed me that you do." With tears in my eyes, I hugged this kind man who had turned what could have been a humiliating experience into a lesson about dignity and self-worth. As I walked through the station toward the main concourse, I saw my mother waiting near the information booth, craning her neck to spot me in the crowd. When our eyes met, her face broke into a huge smile, and she hurried toward me. "There's my college girl," she said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Mom, you don't know if I got in yet. Doesn't matter. You're my college girl no matter what any admissions committee decides." As we walked toward the parking garage, I began telling her about my adventure. I described the teenagers who had mocked my suitcase, my response to their comments, Mr. Thompson's unexpected upgrade, my conversation with Mrs. Patterson, and the interview itself. My mother listened intently, occasionally shaking her head in amazement or beaming with pride. When I told her about Mr. Thompson's story and the business card he had given me, she stopped walking and looked at me seriously. "You know what your grandfather would say about all this, don't you? That good things happen to people who stay true to their values." "Exactly. And that the best journeys aren't always about reaching your destination. Sometimes they're about who you become along the way." Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself back into my regular routine, but everything felt different. I approached my part-time job at the library with more confidence, engaged more actively in class discussions, and began working on a new piece of writing about my train journey and the lessons I had learned. I also started paying more attention to the stories around me in my own community. I interviewed Mrs. Garcia, the elderly woman who ran the corner market and who had immigrated to the United States 50 years ago. I wrote about Tommy, a classmate who had overcome a learning disability to become one of our school's top students. I began to see potential articles everywhere. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon exactly 2 weeks after my interview, I received a phone call that would change my life. "Lily, this is Professor Williams from Columbia University." My heart nearly stopped. My mother, who was cooking dinner, immediately turned off the stove and came to stand beside me. "I'm calling to inform you that you've been accepted into Columbia's journalism program for next fall. We were impressed not only by your academic achievements, but by your maturity, your clear sense of purpose, and your understanding of journalism's role in society." I sank onto our old couch, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "Furthermore," Professor Williams continued, "based on your financial need and the strength of your application, you've been awarded a full scholarship that will cover tuition, room, and board for all 4 years." I started crying tears of joy, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. My mother was crying too, and she grabbed the phone to thank Professor Williams personally. That evening, we called everyone we could think of to share the news. I also wrote thank you notes to Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Thompson, telling them how much their kindness had meant to me and sharing the good news about my acceptance. 3 months later, as I packed for my freshman year at Columbia, I carefully placed my grandfather's suitcase in the center of my dorm room preparations. It would be coming with me to New York, not as a source of embarrassment, but as a reminder of where I came from and the values that would guide me through college and beyond. My mother watched me pack, occasionally offering suggestions or just marveling at how much our lives had changed. "You know," she said, holding up one of my new notebooks, "I think Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing when he left you that suitcase." "What do you mean?" "I think he knew it would teach you that true worth comes from within, not from what others think of your possessions. And I think he knew that lesson would serve you well someday." As I prepared for this new chapter of my life, I reflected on how a simple train journey had become a turning point. The mockery that had initially hurt me had actually provided an opportunity to demonstrate my character. The kindness of strangers had restored my faith in humanity. And the interview that had once seemed so intimidating had become a chance to articulate my dreams and values. The old suitcase sat ready for its next adventure, its worn leather bearing the scars of countless journeys, but its fundamental strength intact. Just like me, it had weathered criticism and emerged stronger. As I prepared to return to New York, this time as a Columbia University student, I knew that my grandfather's legacy would continue to travel with me, reminding me that the most important journeys we take are the ones that help us discover who we truly are. Looking back, I realized that the teenagers who had mocked me at the train station had actually done me a favor. They had forced me to articulate my values and stand up for what I believed in. In trying to diminish me, they had actually provided the catalyst for my growth. As for the suitcase that started it all, it would go on to carry my dreams through 4 years at Columbia, accompany me to internships at major newspapers, and eventually travel with me as I reported on stories from around the world. But its greatest journey